One interesting and enigmatic figure of the Doctor Who wider family, the Doctor Who wider universe, is Matthew Jacobs. Now, Matthew Jacobs was the writer of the Doctor Who 1996 TV movie. He was a writer and also a co-producer. And since then, he has kind of been a little bit silent on the whole Doctor Who fandom thing, despite coming from a Doctor Who family. His father was Anthony Jacobs, who played Doc Holliday in the Doctor Who story The Gunfighters. That's a first Doctor story from the 1960s, which has the honourable distinction of having the lowest audience appreciation index in the entirety of Doctor Who's history. So, oh dear. Anyway, but Matthew Jacobs has recently been revisiting his legacy in a documentary called Doctor Who Am I, which came out a couple of weeks ago, came out on DVD and Blu-ray, had a limited theatrical release. It's coming from the distributor Kaleidoscope Pictures, and Doctor Who Am I follows the story of Matthew Jacobs trying to figure out his place within the broader Doctor Who fandom, because he hasn't really talked too much about his time working on the TV movie. He was, of course, creatively involved quite a lot to an extent as both a co-producer and the screenplay writer as well. But when you think about the TV movie, you think about the director, you think about Paul McGann, you think about Daphne Ashbrook and Eric Roberts and everybody who we saw on screen. But because Matthew has been quite quiet about it, he's not really had much opportunity to talk about his time working on the TV movie up until now with this brand new documentary. So Doctor Who Am I follows Matthew Jacobs going to a convention, going to Gallifrey 1 in America to meet the fandom that he thinks considers him to be a blight on the entire canon of Doctor Who. He was one of the people who decided to make the Doctor half human, to kiss somebody as well, which is a massive no-no back in Doctor Who's classic era. No hanky-panky in the TARDIS, of course. So Matthew Jacob goes to Gallifrey 1, meets a bunch of fans, and it causes him to sort of reevaluate his place within the broader Doctor Who fandom. Let's play a clip from the documentary Doctor Who Am I?
What did you want to talk about?
Oh, I want to talk about your movie.
Okay.
Did you ever see the movie?
Be honest. No.
Okay.
No, I won't lie.
No, good. A lot of people haven't seen the movie.
I don't have any hatred. People hate RTD, people hate Moffat, people hate, with all due respect, your work.
Oh, hello.
How's it going? I'm Kevin.
Hi, Kevin. Nice to meet you. And you've got the paperback version.
Yeah, I got some questions.
Yes.
We're going to talk later about the TV movie. Okay, writer of the TV movie, 1996. First of all, you seem like a nice guy. The Doctor being half human, is that you?
It was. I wrote it in the script.
This interview's
and
over.
then. As I was writing that Doctor, I was pouring myself into that character. I was pouring my experience of the Doctor as a child, and all the wit and all the warmth and all that sort of love that the Doctor has of humans. I was pouring into this character, and I was loving doing it. I was putting myself on the line there.
Someone wrote to me and said, you got it the wrong...
So, Doctor Who Am I? If you go into it expecting, here's a making of the 1996 TV movie, we've got interviews with Paul McGann, with Daphne Ashbrook, with Eric Roberts, this is going to be a full-blown, expose talking about what happened with the TV movie. If you go into the documentary with that mindset, you're going to leave very disappointed. This is much more singularly minded on the present and how its backlash or how it was received has affected Matthew Jacobs and his relationship with trying to get back into the fandom. Ollie Thompson Music, where can I watch this? It's on DVD and Blu-ray. I don't believe it's streaming anywhere, but you can get it online. It's got a home media release, and it had a very small theatrical release at some venues. But yeah, there are interviews, of course, with some big names. There was an interview with Paul McGann. There's Daphne Ashbrook. There's Eric Roberts for about 30 seconds. This was advertised as having interviews with all these people, and Eric Roberts is there with his wife, who plays his wife in the TV movie, who's there for like 30 seconds. It was a bit like a missed opportunity, I think, to that extent. But obviously, this is not meant to be about the TV movie's production. This is about Matthew Jacobs. And, you know, it's basically 80 minutes of personal therapy for the guy. That's the impression that I got. Talking about how fans consider the TV movie to be the worst thing ever. You saw that interview clip there with that podcaster or that interviewer who was like, just jokingly walking away saying, "Oh, you made the Doctor half human, bye bye." But like that interview actually gets quite a bit more spiteful. There's more footage of that, and he's like, "Oh, by the way, you ruined my childhood. You seem like a nice guy, but you ruined my childhood. You made the Doctor." Like, this is like the documentary initially does a pretty good job at siding you with Matthew Jacobs, because my people should not be this petty over what is looking back now, a pretty inconsequential part of Doctor Who canon. It obviously had a big effect on like broader Doctor Who, but because it is now not like, because in the 1990s, you've got to remember that this was like perceived to be Doctor Who's one big chance to come back, and now that it did properly come back in 2005, you can sort of like see it as a slight sidestep in terms of the continuity of the show. That did give us Paul McGann. That did give us Eric Roberts' incarnation of the Master, and sort of did lay the seeds for the 2005 revival. So we can look at it with appreciation in hindsight. But in terms of Matthew Jacobs' approach to this documentary, it seemed a little bit antiquated in terms of how he perceives fandom to be. Like, I think that he goes into a Gallifrey 1 convention, and there are some really nice interviews with couples who like have met each other through Doctor Who and conventions, and through this shared collective love of the fandom, as well as passing it on to their children as well, and younger audiences as well. And there's some great footage with some very creative cosplayers who win a competition at Gallifrey 1. But there's also a lot of stuff about Matthew Jacobs sort of like diving into his own relationship with Doctor Who, and being an American Doctor Who fan whose father was on set for the Gunfighters back in the 1960s. And Matthew Jacobs' mother passed away in the early 1960s, and then all of a sudden Doctor Who comes into his life, and then he makes this strange connection. I don't want to say strange, because it kind of makes sense, that maybe a lot of the people who he meets at Gallifrey 1 and in the fandom, they found Doctor Who at a traumatic or dark time in their lives, and Doctor Who helped to show them a better and brighter future forward. And I think that in and of itself is quite nice, but it seems like Matthew Jacobs kind of associates the entirety of like fiction fandoms to that. Like, you only get into Doctor Who to this extent if you've got a traumatic backstory. And it seems a little bit, I don't know, it seems like a little bit condescending to an extent, and I don't think it's entirely unearned condescension, especially when you've got people who, like in that interview clip, saying, "Oh, you ruined my childhood because you made the Doctor half human," like that, like really petty grudges. But there's also the idea that like that fandom can only blossom in really negative spaces, and I didn't really appreciate that at all. I think that this documentary in and of itself must have been a very interesting and therapeutic experience for Matthew Jacobs himself. I don't want to try and like psychoanalyze the guy or give him like a round of free unqualified therapy, but I think that this documentary might have been a really good introspective healing process for him, and I'm really happy about that. But in terms of it being a broader documentary about fandom, I think it's a little bit too narrow-minded. I think it goes into the documentary with a little bit too much tunnel vision. I think that just sort of centering it around this experience he has going to Gallifrey 1 for a couple of days and interviewing a couple of people for 30 seconds kind of feels like it's not making the most of the premise. And of course, Matthew Jacobs is like the guy at the center of the documentary. He's not obligated as an individual, as a person, to dive into the fandom to a much more extensive extent. It's completely up to him where he sets the boundaries. But in terms of this being a affecting documentary, I don't quite think it hit the mark. Like I said, if you go into this wanting to try and get an insight into the TV movie and its production, then you're not going to find that here. There's even a bit where Matthew Jacobs gets out an old copy of Doctor Who Regenerate, which is a great, like, big, famous inside story about how the TV movie was made, written by Philip Segal. And he says, he just says offhandedly, "Oh, a lot of unkind things were said about me in this book." And then he doesn't elaborate. like he does have a sit-down interview with Philip Siegel at one point at his production company, which is really, really good. I just wish there was maybe more of that, and maybe how they perceived the TV movie and his relationship to it. It just wasn't quite it wasn't quite reaching up to its potential. I saw somebody in the chat saying that they absolutely despised the film, and I also know that Davis of Broke Cannon, like friend of the live stream, he absolutely hated the film as well. And I kind of get it as well. If you don't appreciate Matthew Jacobs as a personality or the way he goes about the topic, I can understand you finding it completely repellent. I absolutely get it. But I also think that he's trying to walk a very narrow tightrope of sort of like being a little bit condescending to fandom, and also trying to be self-deprecating as well. Like he calls himself a low-tier or mid-tier writer, going to a convention, signing things with other low to mid-tier writers. And, you know, I don't think it's a balance that the documentary really properly pulls off. I think there's some lovely interviews in this with Nicholas Briggs and Paul McGann. He's interviewed randomly in like an autumn day, just outside in a garden. I don't know where. There's not much context given in the documentary. I think those bits are lovely as well, and I of course wish Matthew Jacobs all of the best. And I think that, you know, we do have a lot to thank the TV movie for spearheading Doctor Who into the 21st century, and thankfully we can look back in hindsight and in retrospect that, so like, you know, it's sort of like allowed the Russell T Davies' revival to walk in its slipstream, even though it was ultimately a failed backdoor pilot. And just one day, Doctor Who could have had a bright future in like American TV in '96, and then overnight, when it didn't get the viewing figures, it was gone. Like it was just the dream was dead overnight, which I can understand. That might be a pretty bitter pill to swallow for all of those involved. And I hope that Matthew Jacobs got what he wanted in terms of his own relationship to fandom and Doctor Who and being a writer from this documentary. I just maybe wish that Doctor Who Am I cast a slightly wider net in terms of fandom, maybe talk to a few more people within the fandom that weren't just isolated at this Gallifrey 1 convention. And I kind of wish that maybe the answer to the ultimate question, Doctor Who Am I, wasn't just Doctor Who Am I? I'm the friends and fans that we made along the way. Like, it's kind of the ending that you expect going into it, and you kind of wish that it might have been a bit more interesting overall. I didn't quite have the viscerally negative reaction that other people have had to Doctor Who Am I. I thought it was interesting, but I don't really know who the documentary is for. Like, I can't really go into this review recommending it to people who love the 1996 TV movie, or people who despise it, or people who want a much more incisive and interesting look at Doctor Who fandom or sci-fi fandom generally, because it just doesn't quite dive into those topics effectively. I think that the only person I can really recommend this documentary for is Matthew Jacobs himself, and I hope he got what he wanted out of it. But in terms of it being a broader documentary for a wider audience, I don't quite think it hits the mark. Now, Bold on the Brain in the chat, the TARDIS interior in the movie is the goat. There is actually a really nice aside in Doctor Who Am I when they find where the original TV movie console is, and there's a fan who's like preserving it and looking after it, and Matthew Jacobs learns about it, so he donates a bunch of props for safekeeping to be preserved with the TARDIS. It's not the full interior, but it's the TARDIS console and the base and the platform that it's on and the central column, and it's the beautiful like leather-bound not briefcase, the toolkit that the screwdriver in with the lovely snap locking mechanism on the top and everything from the TV movie. That bit was lovely. I can't fully recommend Doctor Who Am I unless you are just a complete completionist about the 1996 TV movie or something to that effect. I think if you're able to maybe rent it on a streaming platform as opposed to outright buying it, if you're curious, that might be the way to go about it. But you can get this on DVD, you can get this on Blu-ray, and yeah, so check it out if it seems like your cup of tea. If you wanted to learn more about the mind of Matthew Jacobs and what Matthew Jacobs thinks about fandom. But if you want a retrospective look back at the 1996 TV movie, you're going to have to look elsewhere.